Once upon a time, a basement-dwelling gamer named Lily was skulking around an aisle at TJMaxx when she happened upon this bag. Excitedly, she reached for the bag, but then a mother lunged at her, fighting for the bag, saying, "You can't have this! You don't fit the target demographic! Let my little son Timmy be happy!" And now for the actual story. Yeah, so this bag was sitting in clearance at TJMaxx, and I got pretty excited when I saw it, but then opening it up and reading the label, I realized the bag wasn't what I thought it was. Rather, it's a game controller bag that you can put your game console and cartridges in, but I already have one of those. Looking at the quality of the bag and that awesome clearance price, I thought, well, what if I get the bag but use it for what I initially thought it was for, which is to custom paint. And it has all these characters drawn around it that are just dying to be colored. Utilizing some brush pen acrylic paint markers, we're gonna bring them to life. It's the Lily factor. Ding! Now, first things first, I wanted to figure out how these acrylic paint markers take on this type of material, since I've never drawn on anything quite like this before. For Valentine's Day, I received some acrylic brush tip paint markers, and I really loved them, but there wasn't even a brown in this color set. And knowing I wanted to use the markers for this particular project, I ended up purchasing an earth tone set of acrylic paint markers for this project in mind, knowing that a lot of Sonic characters require various different earth tones. So I first laid down a little bit of yellow bordering around Sonic because I really liked how Sonic and Shadow were drawn on the bag. So it's not to criticize the design of the bag and say, oh, all of the characters should have been colored, because I really like how those two just pop on the bag. It was clear who they wanted you to see when you first glance at the bag. And so I wanted to maintain that contrast with Sonic and Shadow, where they still pop off of the bag in spite of all the colors that are going to be introduced around them now that I'm individually coloring these characters. So I knew I wanted to use a big yellow outline around Sonic so he still pops off of the bag even after I color all of the characters. That, and I was using it to first test out how the colors take on this material. Even though I'm using acrylic paint markers, they really do not feel like acrylic paint markers on this material. It felt like I was just using any old marker on fabric. It just soaked right into the fabric, and it laid out really nicely. And once I figured out that I really liked how the markers were working on the bag, that's when I decided to just go ahead and start coloring tails first to see what I could do, how I could blend or layer colors. And once I kind of had some base colors down for tails, I started adding some cell shading because I wanted all of the characters to be kind of shaded in. Although I did kind of tussle with the idea of, should I paint over Sonic and Shadow and give them shading, and ultimately I decided not to, so that they could still really pop off of the the bag. Once I had colored tails, I decided to finish adding that yellow outline around Sonic, and then I'll start to add a blue outline around Shadow. This is the only time I used a paint marker that did not have a brush tip. I used one of my old Poscas, and it is a very different experience using a bullet nib versus a brush nib on this bag. It took much longer to outline Shadow than it did Sonic, and the bullet nib just kind of was like gritty against that surface, so sometimes it would kind of splatter paint in areas. There was just a lot of resistance. We're talking about two competing textures here. And like I said, the markers don't really act as paint on this type of bag, so you'll notice that the colors actually blend in really nicely even after they've dried. It's almost just like ink on this surface. And so it was kind of neat that Shadow's outline and Sonic's outline, when they kind of met together, it left this green gradient when the colors blended together. And I'll talk more about why I gave those two different colored outlines and what kind of visually I was going for. But for now, I started coloring Amy, and it's the same process of just laying down base colors and then adding some cell shading later on. Another thing I noticed about using paint markers on this surface is sometimes it was selective. It seemed as though the paint would eventually kind of spread outside of the lines of the characters, and where I really noticed that happen is later on when I color in Amy's nose. The black ink just kind of spread outside of her nose, and because these markers don't really act very painterly on this bag, I had to color over the skin of her face several times to get rid of that black. As you can see, it's a little faint on camera, but you can kind of see it. When I'm coloring in the red on Knuckles over that yellow, you can see there's still orange around Sonic's knee where that yellow outline originally was. The colors just blend. They don't really fight each other, which is nice in a lot of ways, but can be very risky if you accidentally color in the wrong areas. And another thing to note about this too is I am coloring on top of the outlines of the characters printed on this bag, and the outlines still stay there. They just don't go away, which is really nice because then I didn't have to reline things, because I did try to do that and fine liners do not like the texture of this bag. So definitely, if you're going to paint this bag yourself, I highly recommend only using materials with brush tips, whether it be a literal paintbrush and paint or markers with brush tips, because anything else just fights the material, whereas the brush tips just glide across the material, leaving nice results. Overall, it was a really fun kind of project. It's very therapeutic to just kind of sit there and color in the characters on this bag, these paint markers. It was just really cathartic. I really enjoyed myself. Whether I was peacefully coloring and jamming to rock music or talking to my cousin during our doodle session while coloring, it was just a fun experience. Well, would you look at that? Can you see that black smearing around Amy's nose? Yep. So many coats to fight that, I tell you, so many. But yeah, back to me talking to my cousin on the phone. As you can see me coloring Amy's boot there, I had this point in time where I was really struggling to figure out what the line work was kind of around Sonic's elbow and knee area of like, where's Amy's boots and what are some of these lines? And it was really helpful having my cousin on FaceTime because I showed it to her and she kind of gave her input and then it helped me figure out like, oh, that's where the boot was. And then I figured out there was like this circle next to Knuckles' knuckle there. And I was like, what is that? And then I realized, oh, it's his elbow. That's his arm. It was kind of tricky figuring out what some of the line work was there, but I was really relieved to have figured it out. Unfortunately, I cannot say the same about the left side of the bag with Team Dark because, yeah, there was some line work between Shadow's arm and Metal Sonic that I was like, I have no idea what this is. I don't know if it's like Rouge's leg or Eggman's leg or what. I don't know. You'll see what I mean later on. It was also helpful that I happened to have a canvas print hanging on my wall right across from my desk where some of these characters were posed the exact same way. So I was able to just look at that and go, what color is this character's eyes again? And just look up at my wall and oh yeah, that's what it was. And then it helps that some of them are in the exact same pose too. So then I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, that's what they're doing. That's what that should look like. Yeah. Having reference photos and outside eyes to help with these types of things truly does help, as redundant as it sounds. It definitely helped make the coloring process easier, because I definitely didn't want to overcomplicate things for myself. I wanted this to be just kind of a fun, laid-back project, and have something that I can like look at and be like, wow, I painted that. Doesn't that look nice? Now you can see I'm drawing some orange squiggly things around the characters, and this leads me to explaining why I gave Sonic a yellow outline and Shadow a blue outline. Basically, I wanted to add some kind of pop of color background around the characters that mimics the Sonic Mania or the Sonic Generations loading screen style. It's got those like squigglies of colors and things. You just have to see it to understand what I'm talking about. But I wanted to emulate that, but also in kind of my own little spin on it, where on Sonic's side, where you've got Sonic and some of the other hero characters, that it mimics the main colors that are usually seen that have that style. But then for Shadow's side, with the villains and anti-heroes, the Team Dark side, to have the same design, but done in a darker color scheme. So instead of using yellow and orange and brighter colors, it's more red and dark blue and purple and black. You know, gives it more edge. I don't know why I'm talking like this. Team Dark was the side that I saved to color last most intentionally because I was a lot more nervous about coloring them than I was Team Hero, because I'm just not as used to coloring those other characters. I mean, I don't know if that's fair to say, per se. It's just kind of how I feel. But I've definitely colored Eggman and Rouge a lot. But I definitely was most nervous about coloring Metal Sonic. There was just, like, part of my subconscious that was just like, I know I'm gonna ruin it, because I never colored Metal Sonic. And I don't even think I've drawn Metal Sonic, if I'm to be honest. I know, that's a faux pas. I really need to work on that. Because... yeah, drawing mechs, that would be fun. But anyway, and so I was very nervous about coloring Metal Sonic. And then the last time I used that dreaded bullet nib was to color Rouge's eyeshadow, because there's no way I'm gonna give her eyeshadow the wrong shade of blue. Pfft, you kidding me? Why would I do that? I think she would personally reprimand me if I gave her the wrong makeup color. Another thing to note about this bag and this material is, at least with the acrylic paint markers I was using, maybe it's different if I had used fabric paint or something, I don't know, but it definitely does not come across as bold as the print of Sonic and Shadow on there. So their colors were just like a day and night difference between the paint markers and then just what was already on the bag, which I'm not upset about. I mean, I still feel like the characters around them came out pretty vibrant, but I was also glad that they weren't too vibrant. That way Sonic and Shadow still stood out, because like I said, I really liked what they had done with the bag, but I just wanted to color the bag. That's what I thought it was for. And so I'm glad that they could still stand out on the bag, but I could still color the other characters. I tried to be extremely cautious when coloring this bag because I just didn't know how long it would take for the paint marker ink to dry whenever I colored something in. So I always tried my hardest not to plop my hand down directly on the bag, but there were 2 times where I had some slip-ups that I didn't realize, and I look at my hand and it has dark blue paint on it. Thankfully, only one time that happened, I had smeared blue paint onto the bag, but thankfully it was just around Eggman's head and it didn't encroach on him. It was just like kind of thankfully right next to his head. So I was already gonna color some background elements around his head there anyway. And it's Eggman. If I had gotten blue on him anyway, I would have been like, haha, you're a villain, you have it coming. Maybe you're blue because Sonic kicked you in the head one too many times. And then there I showed me painting some purple around Rouge's back to represent her wing. I didn't really know what to paint in that space. I just kind of like guesstimated that was Rouge's wing with that line work there. It got very confusing. So I just kind of like colored Rouge's wing, and then everything else that had line work I didn't understand in that area, I just added little squares and squiggles and background elements. And then we get to coloring Metal Sonic, the part I had feared the most. Especially when, you know, that black ink kind of spreads and smears. It's like, okay, gotta be holding my breath while I'm coloring his eyes there. But here's the funny part. That was the part I feared most and the part I saved last in terms of what characters to paint and color on this bag. But actually, if I'm gonna be honest, it was the one I had the most fun coloring. Truth be told, it was a lot of fun. It just turned out really nicely for me. I didn't have to do cell shading per se, because these robot metal material, different type of lighting and stuff reflected on them. So I kind of kept the shading pretty simple, and adding like a little bit of reflection in there. And it just turned out really nicely. The way those colors just kind of dissolve as they blend with paint colors you've already laid down. I was very glad that I had that canvas picture up on my wall in front of me to look at Metal Sonic and be like, what are his colors? I truly don't know. And then I had a little Metal Sonic figure to help me figure out the hands, because he's got like these black glovey things on his hands, but he also has a yellow piece on his hand. And people who design robotic characters they're just gonna earn my respect, because I can't ever really wrap my head around it. It's like, yeah, there's joints and stuff, but what's the why behind it, you know? Someone knows. People who design these robotic type characters, they have a reason. I'm telling you, I know they do. for some of the design elements. Because a good character design, you're gonna have an explanation as to why they wear or have certain things. So there's more than just joints and random metal pieces. They all connect in some way, they're protective, or it's, you know, some sort of jet on the character so they can blast off and all that crazy stuff. But yeah, laying down that teal for the lighting, then adding a little bit of purple for some like shadowy shading on Metal Sonic, and then just kind of watching it dissolve over time, and then adding a little bit of white for some like little additional lighting details. And you just kind of let it sit for a bit, and then it looks really nice. So that's all the characters painted. The last thing to do is add all those background elements in mind. All the little squigglies and squares and circles to emulate the vision in my head. And you'll see at the end where it seems like it's done when you paint the characters. I start to add those extra colors and stuff, and it just kind of pulled it together even more and really made the bag just pop. And then also helped me with dealing with those random lines between Shadow and Metal Sonic that I'm like, I have no idea what these are. So just add some red, call it a day. Just make it seem like it was intentional and not just, I have no idea what this is. So, purple, yay. And so, I'd like to thank you all for watching and coming along with this painting bag customizing process, and I highly recommend you give it a try. I don't know if there's other bags out there like this for other franchises or just even just a bag in general that you can custom paint, but it's a great material. It was really fun to do. I highly recommend. So here's the finished product, and then I'll do a little comparison of the before and after. And now you can see all the details up close as they surround the front of the bag. Thank you all for coming along this painting process, and may God bless you in your life and your art. Bye!